The neurobiology of people pleasing reveals a powerful, often damaging relationship between our brain's survival mechanisms and our social behaviors. At its core, people pleasing isn't about kindness, it's about fear, safety, and neurological programming. When you consistently put others' needs above your own, you may believe you're being helpful or generous, but what's actually happening inside your brain is far more complex and self-sabotaging. The human brain has evolved to seek connection and approval from others as a survival mechanism. In ancient environments, being accepted by the group was literally a matter of life or death. Rejection could mean isolation, which could mean extinction. As a result, our nervous system is wired to equate social approval with safety. Today, that same mechanism plays out in boardrooms, friendships, and relationships. We fear judgment. We fear saying no. We fear conflict, so we comply. We overextend ourselves. We become nice at the expense of being real. When you're stuck in a cycle of chronic people pleasing, your brain's amygdala, the region responsible for threat detection, is often hyperactive. It perceives the mere possibility of disapproval or conflict as a threat. As a result, your stress response system gets activated even in low-stakes social situations. You feel anxious when someone is upset with you. You avoid confrontation not because it's wrong, but because your brain associates disagreement with danger. This chronic activation of the stress response system, particularly the hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal, HPA axis, leads to elevated cortisol levels over time. High cortisol disrupts sleep, suppresses the immune system, impairs memory, and contributes to long-term burnout. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, decision-making, and impulse control, becomes compromised. Your ability to think clearly, assert boundaries, or prioritize your own needs is diminished. In essence, people-pleasing hijacks your brain's higher order thinking and reduces your behavior to something reactive rather than intentional. This is compounded by the reward system. When you please others and receive praise, validation, or approval, your brain releases dopamine. This feel-good neurotransmitter reinforces the behavior, encouraging you to repeat it. Over time, this reward cycle creates a loop. The more you please, the more you seek the hit of social approval. The danger here is that your identity starts to form around how others perceive you rather than who you actually are. Your self-worth becomes externally sourced. You become addicted to being agreeable. And here's the paradox: the more you rely on external validation, the less stable your internal state becomes. You end up living in a constant state of emotional vigilance, scanning others' reactions to regulate your own sense of safety. This is exhausting for the brain. It increases cognitive load, drains working memory, and leaves you with less energy for meaningful goals. You may feel like you're doing everything right, but inside, you're collapsing. What's even more important to understand is that this pattern is not sustainable, and it is not neutral. Chronic people-pleasing rewires the brain toward compliance, not growth. It weakens your ability to tolerate discomfort, to handle complexity, and to stand firm in your values. It makes you soft in all the wrong ways, soft in conviction, soft in boundaries, soft in identity, and over time, this internal softness leads to external chaos, unfulfilling relationships, resentment, stress, related illnesses, and a quiet, persistent dissatisfaction with life. Reclaiming your brain from this pattern requires deliberate, often uncomfortable, neurological retraining. The first step is awareness. Notice when your impulse to be kind is not genuine, but driven by fear. Observe when you're saying yes to avoid tension, when your smile masks irritation, when your help is a strategy to stay needed. These are moments of incongruence. Your internal state doesn't match your external action. And every time that happens, you are training your brain to ignore its own signals. The next step is to introduce micro moments of truth. This could be as small as pausing before agreeing to a request or expressing a different opinion without apologizing for it. These acts of self-alignment signal safety to your nervous system. Over time, your amygdala learns that boundaries are not threats. Your prefrontal cortex regains control. Your brain becomes more resilient, less reactive, more attuned to your own needs. Ultimately, understanding the neurobiology of people pleasing is not about shaming kindness, it's about refining it. Kindness that comes from wholeness is powerful, but kindness that comes from fear is corrosive. Your brain cannot thrive in chronic self-betrayal. It is designed to support a self that is integrated, not fragmented for the comfort of others. When you stop pleasing and start honoring your internal truth, your brain will stop running from survival and start operating from sovereignty. And that's when real growth begins. Dopamine, the brain's primary reward neurotransmitter, plays a central role in how we experience motivation, confidence, and self-regulation. While most people associate dopamine with pleasure or reward from external achievements, like getting likes on social media, receiving praise, or achieving a goal, what's less commonly understood is that dopamine is also released when we protect our boundaries. Saying no, standing firm in what we believe, and resisting the urge to people please are all actions that signal self with respect to the nervous system. When those actions are consistent with our values and needs, they trigger dopamine in a way that builds real internal confidence. When someone chronically avoids conflict or tries to be overly kind to maintain harmony, they are often operating from a deep fear of rejection or confrontation. The brain, especially the limbic system, interprets these social threats as real dangers. This activates stress pathways that push us toward compliance and avoidance behaviors. Over time, this avoidance becomes habitual. It feels easier to say yes than to confront the discomfort of saying no, even when that yes violates our time, energy, or values. But every time you say no, when you really mean it, you activate a different neurochemical pathway, one that supports long-term motivation, energy, and self-assurance. The act of saying no may feel uncomfortable in the short term, but it aligns your behavior with your internal truth. That alignment produces a small but powerful release of dopamine. This is the foundation of self-reinforcing behavior. The more you practice it, the more you build the habit of showing up authentically. And the brain loves consistency with identity. When your actions match your sense of self, your reward system starts to shift. Instead of chasing approval from others, you begin to feel rewarded by being internally congruent. It's important to understand that dopamine is not about the outcome, it's about the process. In neuroscience, this is referred to as the dopaminergic drive. It's the anticipation of being in alignment with your goals or values that creates the motivation to act. When you consistently act on your own behalf, by setting boundaries, speaking up, or protecting your time, you create a sense of agency. Agency is one of the most biologically rewarding experiences the brain can have. It tells your nervous system, I am in control. That feeling of control is deeply calming to the body and brain. It lowers stress, increases focus, and strengthens your capacity for future challenges. In contrast, when you constantly override your inner voice to be agreeable or kind, you are reinforcing a neurochemical pattern that says, I am not worth protecting. This is not just philosophical, it's biochemical. Over time, a lack of boundary setting suppresses dopamine, and the brain starts to shift into patterns associated with low mood, fatigue, and lack of motivation. You may begin to feel burned out, directionless, or emotionally numb. That's because your reward system has been hijacked by social validation, which is inconsistent and unsustainable. The true strength of the dopamine system is that it is trainable. You can teach your brain to feel good from integrity rather than people pleasing. This starts with small, courageous acts, declining a task when you're overextended, being honest in a conversation, walking away from disrespectful behavior. These decisions don't have to be loud or dramatic. What matters is that they are yours. With each action, your brain gets the message, I matter. My energy matters. My boundaries matter. This reaffirms your identity, and your reward system begins to release dopamine, not for being liked, but for being whole. There's a misconception that being a good person means being constantly available, accommodating, and agreeable. But biologically speaking, true goodness is not rooted in self-erasure. It is rooted in clarity. When you can draw a line and say, this is where I stop and someone else begins, you are protecting not just your time, but your neurochemistry. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They allow the right people, opportunities, and relationships to find you while protecting you from energetic and emotional waste. The beauty of training your dopamine system in this way is that it begins to crave the behaviors that make you stronger. Instead of fearing confrontation, your brain starts to welcome the chance to be real. Instead of chasing praise, you begin to value peace. And instead of overextending, you begin to conserve energy for what truly matters, your growth, your goals, and your authentic self. In the end, every boundary you set is a signal to your brain, I am worth it. I am here to live aligned, not to live exhausted. And that is where real power begins. Constantly adjusting your behavior to please others is a demanding mental exercise that quietly wears down your cognitive resources over time. This phenomenon, often overlooked, has significant consequences for your brain's executive functions, the very skills that govern planning, decision-making, emotional regulation, and problem-solving. When you habitually modify your actions, words, and even thoughts to align with what others expect or desire, you increase your cognitive load, which ultimately impairs your capacity to function optimally. Your brain has a limited capacity for processing information at any given moment, a concept known as cognitive load. Executive functions, housed primarily in the prefrontal cortex, are especially sensitive to this load because they require considerable neural energy to operate effectively. When you engage in chronic people-pleasing, you constantly monitor social cues, anticipate others' reactions, suppress your own preferences, and craft responses aimed at acceptance. This continuous mental juggling consumes working memory and attention resources that could otherwise be used for meaningful tasks or creative thinking. Imagine a computer running multiple demanding programs simultaneously. It slows down, overheats, and eventually crashes. The brain behaves similarly under high cognitive load. When you spread your mental energy thin by trying to be everything for everyone, your brain's processing speed decreases. Decision-making becomes less sharp, and emotional regulation falters. You might find yourself reacting impulsively or feeling overwhelmed by tasks that previously felt manageable. This is not a sign of weakness, but a natural response to being mentally overburdened. Over time, the strain from excessive cognitive load contributes to decision fatigue, a state where the quality of decisions deteriorates after making many choices. Each time you say yes, out of obligation rather than genuine desire, you expend precious mental energy. Your ability to evaluate options critically, weigh consequences, and maintain self-control diminishes. This can lead to poor choices, not because you lack intelligence or willpower, but because your brain's executive control systems are simply overwhelmed. Moreover, constantly tailoring your behavior to fit others' expectations disrupts your emotional authenticity. When your external behavior does not align with your internal feelings, your brain must work harder to maintain this incongruence. This discrepancy triggers what neuroscientists call cognitive dissonance, an uncomfortable state of mental tension. Your brain strives to reduce this tension by either changing your beliefs or your behavior. In the case of chronic people-pleasing, often the behavior changes to maintain social harmony, further draining cognitive resources and deepening the dissonance. The emotional consequences are equally taxing. Suppressing your true feelings to avoid conflict or rejection means your brain cannot fully process these emotions. Instead, they accumulate subconsciously, contributing to stress and emotional exhaustion. Chronic stress impacts the hippocampus, the brain region involved in memory and learning, impairing your ability to retain information and adapt to new challenges. This stress also increases the risk of anxiety and depression, creating a vicious cycle where cognitive capacity is further reduced and emotional resilience erodes. Another critical aspect is the impact on self-regulation, the ability to control impulses and maintain goal-directed behavior. When cognitive resources are drained by excessive social adjustment, self-regulation weakens. You may find it harder to resist distractions, manage frustration, or maintain healthy habits. The result is a subtle but pervasive decline in overall productivity and well-being. Breaking this cycle requires conscious effort and practice. One effective strategy is to reduce unnecessary social adjustments by becoming more aware of your own values and limits. When you know what truly matters to you, it becomes easier to decide when to engage and when to say no. This clarity reduces the mental effort needed to constantly second-guess yourself or anticipate others' expectations. Another approach is to cultivate mindfulness, which enhances your ability to observe your thoughts and emotions without immediate reaction. Mindfulness trains the prefrontal cortex to manage cognitive load better by improving attention control and emotional regulation. This means you become less reactive to social pressures and more grounded in your authentic self. Setting firm boundaries is not just a social skill, it's a cognitive strategy. By defining clear limits, you reduce the need for ongoing behavioral adjustments, freeing up mental bandwidth for more important tasks. Boundaries create predictability and reduce uncertainty in social interactions, which lightens the load on your brain's executive functions. Over time, as you practice these strategies, your brain rewires to operate with greater efficiency. You become more focused, more decisive, and more emotionally balanced. Your cognitive load decreases because you are no longer caught in the exhausting cycle of trying to please everyone. Ultimately, understanding the cognitive cost of over-kindness shifts the narrative from being nice as a virtue to being smart as a necessity. Protecting your brain's executive function is not selfish. It's essential for living a purposeful, healthy, and fulfilling life. When you stop exhausting your mental resources on everyone else's approval, you gain clarity, creativity, and control, qualities that empower you to show up as your best self in every aspect of life. When you are excessively kind to others without regard for your own limits, your body responds in ways that may seem invisible at first, but have profound long-term effects. One of the key players in this biological reaction is cortisol, often called the stress hormone. While cortisol is essential for managing acute stress, it helps your body respond to immediate challenges. It becomes harmful when levels remain elevated chronically, as happens when you suppress your own needs to please others constantly. Every time you put someone else's feelings or desires above your own, especially when it's not reciprocated or appreciated, your nervous system registers this as a form of threat or imbalance. Your brain's amygdala perceives this emotional discomfort similarly to physical danger, activating the hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenals HPA axis. This activation results in the release of cortisol into your bloodstream. In the short term, cortisol mobilizes energy, sharpens focus, and heightens awareness. But when this state becomes persistent due to ongoing emotional strain, the effects turn detrimental. Sustained high cortisol levels wreak havoc on multiple systems within your body. It disrupts your sleep cycles, making restorative rest difficult and leaving you feeling perpetually fatigued. It impairs immune function, making you more susceptible to infections and illnesses. It also affects your metabolism, increasing the risk of weight gain and insulin resistance. Emotionally, high cortisol is linked to increased anxiety, irritability, and difficulty concentrating, all symptoms that compound the toll of chronic overkindness. Beyond these physiological impacts, there's a deeper emotional consequence: resentment. When you repeatedly act kindly out of obligation or fear rather than genuine goodwill, a part of your brain registers this as betrayal of self. The prefrontal cortex, your brain's executive control center, tries to regulate these conflicting feelings, but prolonged suppression causes emotional strain that eventually becomes resentment. This resentment doesn't always surface as anger or confrontation. Often, it manifests subtly as passive, aggressive behavior, withdrawal, or a sense of being misunderstood. Resentment also feeds back into the cortisol cycle. Feeling emotionally burdened by unreciprocated kindness increases stress levels, reinforcing the activation of the HPA axis. This creates a vicious cycle where your body is trapped in a chronic state of stress and your emotional well-being deteriorates. Over time, this cycle can lead to burnout, a state of physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion that leaves you depleted and disengaged. The chronic stress response can also alter brain structure and function. Research shows that prolonged exposure to high cortisol levels can shrink the hippocampus, a brain region critical for memory formation and emotional regulation. This shrinkage impairs your ability to manage stress and reduces cognitive flexibility, making it harder to adapt to new situations or recover from setbacks. In this way, excessive kindness without boundaries doesn't just wear you down, it rewires your brain toward vulnerability and exhaustion. Importantly, this is not a moral failing or weakness. It's a biological reality. Your body and brain are designed to maintain homeostasis, a balanced internal state. When you sacrifice your own well-being for others persistently, you disrupt this balance. The result is a stress response that is no longer adaptive, but destructive. To break free from this pattern, it is crucial to recognize that kindness without limits is not sustainable kindness. Real kindness involves emotional reciprocity, a balance where your giving is matched by respect and care from others. When this balance is missing, your nervous system signals distress, and it's a cue to reassess your boundaries. One effective strategy to regulate cortisol and reduce resentment is to practice conscious boundary setting. This means not only saying no when necessary, but also communicating your needs clearly and without apology. When you protect your energy, you send a signal to your brain that your well-being matters. This reduces the perception of threat and lowers cortisol production. Another powerful tool is stress management techniques such as mindfulness, breathing exercises, and physical activity. These practices help calm the HPA axis and promote parasympathetic nervous system activation, the rest and digest state, which counters the harmful effects of chronic cortisol. Regularly engaging in these activities enhances emotional resilience and makes it easier to maintain healthy boundaries without guilt. Understanding the cortisol-resentment connection also encourages compassion toward yourself. It's common to feel guilty for prioritizing your needs, especially if you've been conditioned to equate kindness with self-sacrifice. But recognizing the biological consequences of over-kindness reframes self-care as essential rather than optional. You are not being selfish, you are preserving your health, vitality, and emotional balance. Ultimately, stopping indiscriminate kindness is a form of biological self-preservation. It protects you from the invisible but powerful forces of chronic stress and emotional depletion. By honoring your limits and expecting reciprocity, you create a sustainable way to engage with others, one that nourishes both your well-being and your relationships. This shift is not just beneficial for you, it also sets a healthy model for those around you. When you prioritize balance, you teach others that kindness does not require self-sacrifice and that true connection is grounded in mutual respect. In this way, regulating cortisol and managing resentment through boundaries is not only a personal victory, but a foundational step toward healthier, more authentic social interactions and a more fulfilling life. Humans are inherently social beings, wired not only to connect, but to mirror the emotional states of those around them. This process of emotional mirroring is mediated by what neuroscientists call the mirror neuron system, a network of brain cells that activate both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action. This system is foundational for empathy, social learning, and understanding others' intentions. But it also means that the way you carry yourself emotionally has a direct and powerful effect on those in your social environment. When you are overly kind without asserting your own needs, your emotional state communicates a message that others subconsciously pick up on. Your nervous system becomes a cue that you are agreeable, compliant, or even vulnerable. People don't just see your words, they feel the energy you project. If your kindness masks insecurity or a lack of boundaries, others' mirror neurons respond to that underlying state, often adjusting their behavior accordingly. This can lead to dynamics where your kindness is taken for granted, your boundaries are tested, or your needs are overlooked. The mirror neuron system works bi-directionally. If you project calm, confidence, and assertiveness, the people around you tend to mirror these qualities back. This doesn't mean dominating or controlling others, but rather holding a clear and steady emotional presence that signals self-respect and strength. When you assert yourself, even in small ways, you activate a feedback loop where others sense your emotional state and calibrate their responses to match it. This fosters mutual respect and balanced interactions. Assertiveness is fundamentally about emotional clarity and congruence. It requires your internal experience and external expression to align. When you say what you mean and mean what you say, you are sending a clear signal to your mirror neuron system and to others that you are trustworthy and authentic. This authenticity encourages reciprocal behavior, reducing the likelihood of manipulation, misunderstanding, or boundary violations. The social brain thrives on predictability and emotional honesty. When your emotional signals are congruent, the mirror neuron system facilitates smoother social exchanges, deeper empathy, and healthier relationships. People feel safer around you because they can read your intentions accurately. This safety reduces social friction and enhances cooperation. On the other hand, when your kindness is inconsistent with your internal emotional state, say you smile but feel resentment or fear, this creates a mismatch that the mirror neuron system detects as well. This emotional dissonance can create confusion, mistrust, and subtle tension in your interactions. Others may unconsciously sense your discomfort and respond with guardedness or even exploit the inconsistency to push boundaries further. Importantly, developing assertiveness is a neurobiological process, not just a social skill. It involves strengthening the connections between the prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making and self-regulation, and the mirror neuron system, which facilitates social attunement. Through practice, your brain becomes better at integrating your internal emotional states with your outward expressions. This integration is what makes assertiveness feel natural rather than forced. One effective way to cultivate this integration is through mindful self-awareness. By tuning into your bodily sensations, emotions, and thoughts, you can recognize when your external behavior is out of sync with your internal experience. This awareness allows you to adjust your responses in real time, creating greater emotional congruence. The more you practice this, the more your nervous system learns to hold steady emotional signals, which in turn shapes the social feedback you receive. The mirror neuron system also highlights why your emotional homeostasis, the balance of your internal emotional state, is crucial for healthy social interactions. If you are emotionally dysregulated, perhaps due to stress, anxiety, or unresolved conflicts, your mirror neurons may amplify these states in social settings, making it harder to assert yourself effectively. Conversely, when you cultivate emotional balance through practices like meditation, breath work, or grounding techniques, your mirror neurons help propagate calm and confidence to others. This dynamic underscores a powerful truth. You don't just manage your own emotions, you influence the emotional climate of your environment. When you prioritize assertiveness and emotional congruence, you are not only protecting yourself, but also fostering healthier, more respectful relationships. You create a space where kindness is genuine, boundaries are honored, and mutual understanding thrives. In essence, the mirror neuron system teaches us that assertiveness is a form of leadership, not in the sense of dominance, but in emotional influence. By embodying clarity and respect in your interactions, you guide others toward more balanced and empathetic responses. This is the biological foundation of social harmony. Ultimately, embracing assertiveness is not about abandoning kindness, it's about refining it. It's about being kind without sacrificing your needs, honest without causing harm, and strong without becoming rigid. When your emotional presence is clear and congruent, kindness becomes sustainable and powerful, not a vulnerability, but a source of mutual respect and growth. Being constantly kind to everyone, especially when it comes at the expense of your own needs and boundaries, can lead to a profound loss of self-identity over time. Our sense of self is shaped by the choices we make, the boundaries we uphold, and the values we live by. When you habitually prioritize others' desires and emotions over your own, you create a dissonance between your authentic self and the persona you present to the world. This dissonance can erode your core identity, leaving you feeling fragmented, lost, or disconnected. Your identity is not static. It is a dynamic construct that evolves based on your experiences, actions, and reflections. At the neurological level, identity is maintained through the repeated activation of neural circuits related to self-perception, decision-making, and memory. When your behavior consistently contradicts your internal beliefs or feelings, the brain faces a challenge. It must reconcile this incongruence to maintain a coherent sense of self. This cognitive and emotional tension can manifest as confusion, anxiety, or emotional exhaustion. One of the key ways that over-kindness contributes to identity loss is through the suppression of personal values and preferences. When you say yes to everything and everyone to avoid conflict or gain approval, you are effectively sidelining your own priorities. Over time, this leads to a weakening of the neural pathways that support your authentic desires and goals, while strengthening those that reinforce external validation and compliance. The brain, being highly plastic, adapts to these repeated patterns, making it harder to recognize or reclaim your true self. This pattern can also create a feedback loop of diminished self-esteem. When your actions do not reflect who you genuinely are, you may experience feelings of inauthenticity and self-doubt. These feelings can drive you further into people-pleasing behaviors as you seek validation from others to fill the internal void. This cycle reinforces the separation from your authentic identity and makes it increasingly difficult to break free. Furthermore, losing touch with your identity impacts your ability to set meaningful goals and make decisions that align with your life's purpose. Identity provides the framework for what matters most to you, guiding your choices and motivating your actions. Without a clear sense of self, Decision-making becomes fragmented and uncertain. You may find yourself drifting through life, reacting to external demands rather than proactively shaping your path. Restoring and maintaining your identity requires intentional effort and self-awareness. One critical step is to engage in regular reflection and introspection to reconnect with your values, beliefs, and desires. Practices such as journaling, meditation, or therapy can help bring unconscious patterns to light and foster a deeper understanding of who you are beyond social expectations. Setting boundaries is also essential for preserving your identity. Boundaries act as declarations of self-respect and protect the neural circuits that support your authentic self-expression. By consistently honoring your limits, you reinforce the message to your brain that your needs and values are valid and worthy of protection. This reinforcement strengthens your sense of self and builds resilience against external pressures. It's important to recognize that reclaiming your identity does not mean becoming selfish or uncaring. Rather, it means cultivating a balanced self-concept where kindness and authenticity coexist. When you are true to yourself, your kindness becomes more genuine and impactful because it arises from a place of wholeness rather than depletion. Neuroscience also shows that social identity, the aspects of ourselves shaped by group memberships and relationships, is deeply intertwined with personal identity. Overt kindness often stems from a desire to belong and be accepted, but if this need drives you to suppress your individuality, it undermines both personal and social identity. Healthy social connections depend on authenticity, where individuals feel free to express their true selves within their communities. Reclaiming your identity through boundary setting and authentic kindness creates a positive ripple effect. It not only improves your mental and emotional health, but also enhances your relationships. When you show up as your full self, you invite others to do the same, fostering deeper connection, trust, and mutual respect. Ultimately, the process of stopping indiscriminate kindness to everyone is a journey back to yourself. It is about honoring the intricate balance between self-care and compassion for others. As you rebuild your identity, you create a foundation of strength and clarity that supports a fulfilling, meaningful life. This authentic self-expression is the essence of true kindness, kindness that enriches both you and the world around you.